Good afternoon, good evening, or good morning. Thank you for joining the 26th report on migration 2020, migration to Italy and Europe in the COVID era, which is actually the first presentation of the annual ISMU report to an international audience. So this is quite an important day for the foundation. For those of you who knows ISMU Foundation, ISMU is not new. Actually, it exists since 30 years, and this year we're going to have a celebration for this. And during its quite long life, ISMU produced dozens of researches and implemented hundreds of projects devoted mainly to support the knowledge exchange between scholars, policymakers, and civil society stakeholders working on migration issues. And one of the mission of ISMU Foundation is also to support an inclusive society where we all can live in a nice way. This year, rather than national, we opted to frame the report on a more European level. This was to confirm ISMU commitment on a broader scale. And the one-hour webinar aims at discussing the major trends concerning migration to Italy and Europe, analyzing the enduring effects of the pandemics on migration flows and on the lives of migrants in Italy. And we are here also to discuss about the future prospects and challenges of migration management with the dialogue session. Before introducing the speakers, let me share a few housekeeping rules. First of all, for those of you who may like to have questions that will be very much appreciated, please write them in the YouTube or Twitter chat box so that we can forward them to the speakers. And please also note that the report is downloadable from the ISMU homepage in open access. So if you go to ISMU website, you will have the report for free. But before moving ahead, I'm glad to give the screen to Massimo Gaudina, head of the representation of the European Commission in Milan, kindly supporting this event. Good morning. Good afternoon, Mr. Gaudina. Would you like to come in?
Good afternoon to you and to everybody. And again, thank you for this event. Let me greet you. Let me thank ISMU and all our friends, Vincenzo Cesario, Nicola Pasini, you, Dr. Gilardoni, and everyone, and thank you for organizing this. The presentation of the ISMU report on migration is every year a very important moment also for the representation of the Commission in Milan. Maybe not everyone in the audience knows that the European Commission has not only offices in the 27 capital towns, but also in 6 non-capital cities in Europe, and one of these 6 is Milan. And we are very glad to work in Milan with many important stakeholders, and ISMU is one of them. Certainly in the area of migration, it has become a real institution because the research, the studies, the reports published every year by ISMU occupy a very important role and moment in the city, in the media, and in the world of the people dealing with migration. Migration is not a forgotten issue. We every day talk about and listen about vaccination, health, and certainly also the climate emergency. We do not hear much now, at least, about migration issues, but migration continues to be a big priority for Europe. And we have a whole Directorate General working on this, DG Home. We have a commissioner working on this, a vice president. We have ministers meeting regularly, although virtually, to tackle migration issues. We have a European agenda that will be presented later by my colleague, Patrick Doelle, who is working in Rome, detached in Rome from DG Home, which is the Directorate General for Internal Affairs. So it's an important moment, as I said, because it's a moment where we can count on facts and data. And this is what we need and what policymakers need more and more, because evidence-based policy is certainly one of the way the European institutions want to continue to work. So we need evidence, we need data, we need quantitative and qualitative analysis on many policy areas, and certainly on migration. So this is absolutely important, and I congratulate ISMU for their research and also for their participation in many European research projects under the Horizon Europe and Horizon 2020 program. It's also important to talk about, as you say, as you do in your report, to talk about media and how media and communication cover the migration issues, because there is a gap in many areas, from vaccine to economy, about between the reality and the perception of citizens. So the role of media also in the migration issue is very important. And I see that again, you dedicate a chapter of your report to this issue. So after all these congratulations, let me welcome all of you to this. Let me say that the representation in Milan is still available and ready to cooperate also in the future on this extremely important priority topic. My colleague, as I said, will develop more in depth all these arguments, and I just wish you all a very good and interesting and stimulating seminar.
Thank you, Mr. Gaudina, for the welcome warming up and for your positive remarks on ISMU. We are absolutely devoted to support an evidence-based culture and studies on migration. Thanks for your support. I am now happy to introduce Livia Ortensi, who leads the statistical unit at ISMU, being also a senior assistant professor in demography at the Department of Statistical Sciences in the University of Bologna. Please, Livia, let us know more about migration in Italy from a statistical perspective.
So thank you, Guia. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for giving me the floor. I will, first of all, share my screen. Here. So I hope everything is working. So in these few minutes, I will illustrate and discuss the latest data about migration, trying to disentangle trends that were in place before the pandemic onset and after the pandemic onset. Indeed, the pandemic completely changed the world as we knew, at least in the last year, and is expected to impact on economy and migration, at least in the short term. However, as we will see, despite the public discourse, as said also by Dr. Gaudina, still very focused on the so-called rhetoric of invasion, data shows that Italy is mostly dealing with other problems, such as demographic decline and labor force shortage. To put the recent data into the right perspective, I'll briefly remind how Italy emerged as a country of immigration starting from the 70s, with massive inflows peaking especially in the first decade of the new century. Even after the 2008 economic crisis, flows reduced, but not as much as in other countries with similar histories, such as Spain, for example. So as 1st January 2020, around 6 million people staying in Italy are foreign, and they represent 9.9% of the present population, so a very important part of our population nowadays. Most of them are regular in their legal status, are residents, and are long-term migrants. And 8.7% is estimated to be undocumented. What is most significant is that for the first time, as of January 2020, so before the pandemic onset, we see a reduction in the number of foreigners. And as we will see, it is not only the consequence of a rise in a positive trend in the number of naturalization, but we have many signs that Italy is becoming less and less attractive to foreign citizens. Beside, if we see at the number of first resident permits is issued in 2009, so before the pandemic onset, we see that the number reduced. And if we look at the new permits broken down by reason, we see that family reasons are prevalent, as happens to countries with a long and mature history of migration. So Italy is now a country of migration, not a new country anymore. We also see a reduction in the permits released for asylum-related reasons, and I will talk about this more in depth later. So before the onset of the pandemic, the number of third country nationals entering in Italy was reduced comparing to the previous years. The pandemic onset, of course, impacted on migration, and but we saw that there was a reduction even before the COVID pandemic was, let's say, exploded in Italy after February 2020. The National Institute for Statistics made a huge effort to produce data for the first semester of 2020, and we see an overall drop of new inflows of third country nationals of more than 50% in the first 6 months. So a very important reduction, but it was a trend that was in place before. The trend in irregular migrants is also very interesting because, according to the last ISMU available estimate, we estimate a reduction in the number of undocumented migrants present, despite the effect of the 2018 security laws that, as we will see, increased the asylum rejection rates. As you can see from the slide, Italy has an history characterized by the high proportion of undocumented among the migrants, especially during the 90s. And their number decreased after the 2008 crisis and was slowly rising since 2013. The sudden decrease before the pandemic suggests a drop in the opportunities in the informal labor market even before, and follows the trend of regular migrants that we have just seen. Number was also corrected after the 2017 and 18 rolling census found many resident migrants have left Italy. So after the census, we find out that legal migrants were less than we expected. Many had already left Italy for, we don't know, their country of origin or to migrate onward. As for 2020, we have also data on sea arrivals, land border crossing, and asylum requests. Sea arrivals have been relatively low in 2018 and 2019, much lower than the so-called refugee crisis of 2015 and 2019. We see that in 2020 numbers rose again, even if they are very far from the peaks as I said, 2015, 2017. However, it is a fact that this type of flows follow different logic compared to those driving economic and family migrants. We cannot forget that especially migrants crossing Libya arrive in Italy after long journeys and are exposed to violence and torture. And as these journeys are very long, many of them may have left their country of origin before the onset of the COVID-19, so they found in between and try to cross the Mediterranean all the same. What happened to those who apply for asylum? For those who are not familiar with the Italian law, in 2018, we had a new law that ended humanitarian protection, and this led to a further increase in rejection rates that were already increasing. What I want to stress is that beside the overall increase in rejections, the effect of the law that was recently amended is still poorly understood, especially in its effect at the nationality levels. As you can see from the graph, some nationalities were not affected from the law. They didn't see rejection rise, but they instead had a higher access to the refugee status. Other nationalities, for example, Ukraine, Egypt, or El Salvador, had rejection rate peaking very fast. Also, as a reaction to the pandemic, Italy promoted an amnesty, another one, that was meant to address the shortage of agricultural workers in the first place. In its effect, however, the amnesty were very similar to a classical Italian amnesty, with most application in the domestic and care work service. If we look at the profile of the applicants and knowing how segmented by ethnicity is the Italian job market, it seems quite evident that application in these sectors are probably meant to overcome barriers to other jobs imposed by the amnesty itself. All the same, Italy received around 200,000 requests, and again, it was not a huge success, stressing the reduced attractivity of Italy, especially after, in this case, the COVID crisis. So some take-home messages. We see basically two different trends. One is prevalent and has to do with the general population and sees a reduction of attractivity of Italy. We cannot say if this will last, but surely it's not all about the COVID crisis. It was something that was at work before. The other has to do with humanitarian flows that are instead rising again, and even more in 2021, even with levels that are very far from those of the refugee crisis. We saw how the law impacts on rejection rates, and we will evaluate the effect of the 2020 amendment that opened again the ground for receiving permits of stay. As for irregular migration, it was already decreasing and is expected to drop in the next estimation for the next year due to the amnesty on one side and the economic crisis on the other. But again, this is following a trend that was already in place. So thank you for your attention. I think.
Thank you, Livia. Thank you for having brought us along the last available data. It's always interesting to see things from numbers perspective. Now is the time for the question and answer. So if there are in the audience someone who might want to have a question that Livia could answer, this is the time for writing it in the YouTube or Twitter chat box. So please have your question. While we are waiting, I will take the advantage of being the chair of the session to pose a question from my side. It's clear you said that Italy is not attractive as it was before. And this could be, it's a little bit ambivalent as a reality. As a demographer, which are the expected impacts of this reduction on migration flows to Italy on the Italian population as a whole? And which are the consequences, in your opinion, of this reduction on migrants themselves? I mean, on those who are willing to enter Europe but are impeded to do.
So on the population, and the Italian population on the whole, I think the effects are very clear. So on one side, the the first and most important problem is the labor shortage, because we already know that Italy is expected to have a decline in population of working age, and this decline will happen even with sustained migration flows. So if migration become less important, this problem that we are sure we will have will become more and more important. On the others, at the same time, what we can expect if migrants, let's say, are less important in Italian population, it's a problem about aging, because we are a very old country, and without families, with less families, with less children, with less second generation, our destiny is to be even more a country of all people. For those who are willing to enter Italy, well, it all depends on law on one side, because if they are admitted legally, they will find an environment that in this very moment can be complicated by the economic crisis. So this is indeed a problem. If they enter irregularly, they are expected to be even more vulnerable, because we see that irregular migrants that were in Italy before the COVID crisis were declining. So this is a clear sign that the black and gray economy was not doing well, and with the COVID crisis, they are expected to be even more vulnerable. Our impression is that was also strengthened by the results of the amnesty, is that you are willing to invest on Italy, on your future in Italy, if you have a family, a community, a network that can possibly help you. But if you are from, so we had Pakistanis, people from Bangladesh, big communities are still investing in Italy. New communities, for example, those we were expecting to see some among the main nationalities that are about that are at the top of asylum seeker requests, and they were not among the main applicants for the amnesty. So this means that these are communities, smaller communities, new communities for Italy. These are not investing their future in Italy, not now at least. So I think it's also very important the role of formal and informal safety nets for communities in this very moment.
Thank you, Livia. It's very interesting. It seems like just a moment ago we were afraid of being invaded, while now we are afraid of remaining not attractive, not enough attractive. We have a question from the audience. The first one is, are migrants from Georgia, specifically those employed in the domestic sector, somehow visible in your statistic?
Are visible surely in the among the people that is registered in the population register, so we can count them if they are regular migrants, and if they have a permit of stay, indeed we count this, and if they are resident even more. As for irregular migrants, we have estimation by country of origin or by area. Georgia is not one of the main communities in Italy. So it's difficult to have the detail for this country. Usually it's not provided because it's a secondary community compared to other from the same area, but they are included, of course.
Thank you. So yes, the Georgian people are those small community who are not likely to invest in Italy.
Maybe it can be.
Okay, thank you. And we have another question. This is more methodological. There's someone who is asking how you count regular migrants when you provide your figures. Specifically, the figures on regular migrants are including also refugees or asylum seekers?
Yeah, of course. Refugees are migrants with a permit of stay, so they are, say, fully counted. But also asylum seekers, because they are counted in the regular population because they have a regular. They are staying legally in Italy until their application is under investigation. So yeah, they are counted, and they sometimes they are considered illegal if they have a first instance rejection, but it's not like this, because if you apply against a negative decision, you are still a regular migrant until your claim is examined. So yeah, asylum seekers are legal migrants indeed. The difference can be for those who arrive on the, let's say, Italian shores. They are counted in among the sea arrivals, but if they do not present any asylum claim, they are not counted as legal migrants, because they do not present an asylum claim. In the moment they present an asylum claim, they are legal, at least until they have an answer to their application.
Okay, so even those who would be eligible but do not start the procedure, they are considered not regular. Yeah, okay.
Yeah, because they are on the Italian territory without a valid permit of stay, and not even for asylum request.
Okay, thank you very
Sometimes
much.
it's a strategy. They want to just transit through Italy and not being fingerprinted to be in the Dublin regulation. Of course, it can be a strategy to remain illegal because you don't want really to stay in Italy. You just want to go through and go elsewhere.
A dangerous strategy, but yes, it could be. Yeah, okay. Thank you very much, Livia, for your contribution. And now we move us on to the second part with the dialogue session on the European governance of migration, focusing on issues at stakes and current developments. It's my pleasure to introduce Alessia Di Pascale and Patrick Doelle. Alessia is Associate Professor of European Union Law at the University of Milan, Faculty of Law, where she teaches migration law, dealing mainly with the legal profiles of immigration and asylum policies of the European Union. And Patrick Doelle is an official of the Directorate General Migration and Home Affairs of the European Commission. And he's based since 2016 at the representation of the European Commission in Rome, from where he provides migration management support to Italy and Malta. Please, Alessia, Patrick, the screen is yours. Alessia, we can't hear you. No.
Sorry.
Okay, now you go. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Guia, for your introduction. So I'm very happy to be here today with Mr. Doelle, who represents DG Home, so it will bring us a lot of interesting information on current developments on migration issues. So I would like to address him a few questions that we have elaborated together with the group of researchers who work or are associated to ISMU Foundation and who work specifically on European and African issues. So first of all, my first question concerns, of course, the European Pact on Migration and Asylum. The pact was presented last September, and we can say it focuses mainly on 3 pillars: establishing a more effective mechanism for solidarity among member states, the reinforcement of EU external borders by facilitating effective identification mechanisms and linking asylum and return procedures, and improving cooperation with international partners in the area of migration management. So this package was long awaited, but it was met with mixed reactions, I will say, and it aroused much concern from civil society and academia. Particularly the solidarity mechanism that should replace the current Dublin system is not considered adequate, since it is mandatory only in some cases, even when it is mandatory, states are allowed to avoid relocation by providing other forms of assistance. I will mention that they can opt for sponsorship of returns, or they can contribute to capacity building, operational support, technical and operational expertise. Similarly, the proposal to strengthen the control at external borders through the introduction of a pre-screening mechanism and the greater use of border and accelerated procedure have raised concern. The preparation of this proposal was preceded by extensive consultation, as the Commission itself has pointed out, and we know that it was preceded by a 4-year attempt to approve the previous proposals of reform to Dublin regulation. So could you further explain the complex of divergent positions in which the Commission has moved, between which it has tried to mediate? And could you also update us on the progress of the institutional negotiations? How the package has been received by the European Parliament and the Council, and where are we with the negotiation?
Yeah, thank you very much for these very relevant questions. And first of all, good afternoon to everyone, to all the audience, and thank you very much also to the ISMU Foundation for the invitation to this event and for giving the European Commission the opportunity to provide a few insights on the proposed pact. You already mentioned that, well, the pact combines a number of important areas. Indeed, I will not go here into detail to present all the elements of the pact, which are, let's say, even wider than these 3 main blocks you have defined. I mean, the Commission has tried to take a very comprehensive and also balanced approach on migration flows and migration management in the European Union, where you have, of course, the internal and the external dimension, and you have to find the right balance between responsibility and solidarity. So, as you also mentioned, there have, of course, been a lot of prior consultations, and we already had the experience of several years of negotiations on the previous proposals, which were put forward, let's say, during and after the so-called migration crisis in 2015, 2016. So we could, let's say, already build on several years of negotiations, which, well, unfortunately, to a large extent, have been or were unsuccessful in the sense that many of the proposals which had been put forward by the European Commission were eventually not yet adopted by the European legislator, which is on one side the Council, represented by all its member states, and on the other side by the European Parliament. So the Commission, of course, took some time to try to make a new start with the pact, to try to unblock some of the, let's say, the most contentious issues, which are in particular on solidarity, as you have already mentioned. We are, of course, fully aware that our proposals didn't please anyone. Actually, it would have been a bit suspicious if one or the other member state would have stated, oh, yes, this is exactly what we wanted the European Commission to propose. I mean, it's clear that everyone had to be a bit dissatisfied with our proposal, because at the end we try to find compromises between all the different and sometimes extremely different positions of the member states on one side, and of course also the European Parliament. And we need, of course, also to be very realistic. This is, let's say, the mandate of the European Commission with the spirit of the EU treaties. We have to propose solutions, to propose legislative instruments which also have some chance of being adopted. So we can, of course, also understand that in particular civil society may have been disappointed with a certain lack of ambition as they perceive it from their side. But I repeat, we need to be realistic on what can be achieved and on what can be possible compromises between the member states, which have sometimes extremely different views and needs and challenges when it comes to migration management. So if one would like to simplify a bit, and in reality, of course, the situation is much more nuanced, because each member state has its own positions on the various proposals which have been made. But you could say there are three main groups of member states. So on the first, of course, is the so-called frontline member states, which are Italy, Spain, Greece, Cyprus, and Malta, who are, let's say, on the border of the Mediterranean, and which are, let's say, in the first line when it comes to most of the migratory flows. And therefore have also a huge burden to carry in this regard, and who therefore request, rightly so, more solidarity from the other member states when it comes to shoulder this burden. Then you have on the other extreme side, if I may say, the so-called four Visegrad countries, so Czech Republic, Hungary, Poland, and Slovakia, who have, over the negotiations in the last years, taken very clear stance that, for instance, they are absolutely opposed to any form of mandatory relocation within the European Union. So this is for them simply a red line, which does not mean that they are necessarily opposed to solidarity as such, but they would like them to express the solidarity through other means, but not through mandatory relocation. And then you have, let's say, the majority of other member states, of course, also with divergent views among them, but broadly speaking, they are, let's say, also agreeing, of course, with mandatory solidarity, including relocation, but in turn for more controls at the EU's external borders. Also because what they fear in particular are the so-called secondary movements. And so this would be, let's say, migrants, and as the preceding speaker already explained, I mean, there are many migrants who arrive in Italy who don't have any intention to stay in Italy, so they just move on to the other member states in the north. And you can see that over the last years, countries like Germany or France, they had 5 times as many asylum applicants as Italy. Italy is almost at the bottom when it comes to the number of asylum requests per capita in Europe. So other member states consider that Italy, even if migratory flows have again increased since last year, but are still very, very far from the figures we have seen in 2015, 2016, that Italy is not considered by them as being under migratory pressure. So the perceptions can be very different from between the member states. And then, of course, there's also the European Parliament, who generally takes a more rights-based approach. So is, of course, keen to ensure that asylum applications are performed in a consistent and respectful manner. Is, of course, also in favor of solidarity, even if it seems from the current negotiations that the new European Parliament may not be in favor of an automatic redistribution system within the European Union, as was the case with the previous European Parliament, who adopted a position in that sense back in 2017. So it is very clear from these different positions that the proposal from Commission side to propose a mandatory relocation, mandatory redistribution system within the European Union, where all migrants arriving in frontline member states would automatically be redistributed, would have absolutely no chance of being adopted in the European Union. So the Commission had to propose a much more nuanced proposal, which takes into account these different positions, and where it's also clear that solidarity, in particular relocation, is the other face of the same medal, which also includes more responsibility, which means more controls at the external borders. And this explains also then the assistance of many other member states on providing for a mandatory border procedure.
Sorry to interrupt you, since unfortunately I have limited time. And do you have the impression, as an officer of the Commission, that this strategy is having success? Do you have the impression that this attempt to mediate will have a good impact on the attitudes of member states?
Well, to be honest, I mean, what we have seen until now is, unfortunately, to a very large extent, just a repetition of the same positions which we have seen already over the last years before the proposal of the pact. And this is, of course, not very useful. I mean, we continue to insist with member states that, I mean, we understand all the positions, all the concerns, but the status quo is not an option. It is bad for all member states. It's bad for the European Union. It gives a very bad image of the European Union of being completely divided on this very important issue. And all member states need at some stage to compromise. And we are, of course, in frequent contact with member states at the Council. We are negotiating with the European Parliament. So negotiations are making slow progress, but there's already progress. So we hope on one side that with the European Parliament still this year, they may adopt, let's say, the first positions on some of the proposals. And when it comes also to the member states, we hope that at least with some of our proposals, which actually had already been made even before the pact, for instance, the proposal back in 2016 for a new EU asylum agency, which would, let's say, be an improvement compared to the current EASO, European Asylum Support Office. That this could already be adopted, hopefully this year. So just to show also that at least there's some progress with the pact, slow progress, and where then trust could be also rebuilt. It's to a large extent also a matter of trust between the member states. So we need to rebuild this trust so as to move ahead and also on the other more difficult elements of the pact and to achieve the right balance between responsibility and solidarity. And of course, the Commission proposals can be improved. We are absolutely open to improvements and suggestions from all sides, including civil society. But it's also clear that it will have to be a combination of all these elements I described.
Okay, thank you very much. So since you mentioned EASO, I have a very quick question on EASO. Since we know that one of the main critical issues of the common European asylum system is the divergent approach in member states. Unfortunately, there are still huge differences in the application of the instruments currently into force. So the European Commission on one side had proposed to replace them with regulations that should limit the discretion of member states, and on the other side had proposed to strengthen the role of EASO. So the proposal was also submitted in 2016. And in that regard, I'd like to ask you concerning the advancement of the negotiation process. Do you think, as you mentioned, that there could be a more positive attitude from member states in that regard? And concerning the funding that should be allocated to properly provide EASO with the resources to carry on an effective support work to member states?
Thanks. Yeah, no, indeed, EASO, or the future European Asylum Agency, has of course a key role to play also in the proposed system. What is of course of fundamental importance is to ensure also a harmonized asylum system throughout the European Union. So to ensure a high level of protection in all member states, and this in turn would then certainly also contribute to reduce the so-called secondary movements, where what is sometimes called asylum shopping, where migrants move from one country to the other because they hope that there they may have more success in requesting asylum. And this, of course, clogs up the system and creates then all the issues with the current Dublin regulation. And EASO has, or the new European Asylum Agency, has a key role to play in that. So if this proposal should be adopted, and there is some hope that member states now may find a compromise on that, so this would be a first step towards, let's say, the adoption of the pact. That then, of course, the agency would have additional powers and additional means to contribute to the strengthening of the asylum systems in the member states through its operations on the ground, as in Italy, through training, capacity building, and let's say promotion of best practices. And of course, through the development of various tools, statistics as well. So everything which can support, of course, the member states in their various tasks. And in anticipation already of the creation of the agency, the Commission has considerably, let's say, the European Union, on the basis of Commission proposals, has increased the budget of EASO, the number of staff, which was recently increased from 370 to 500 in anticipation of the agency. So this would, let's say, be the staff certainly required as a first basis. But then in case of the adoption of the agency regulation, we would also see then the creation of a new asylum reserve pool, which would be constituted of 500 additional experts to be made available by the member states, and which could then easily be deployed to the member states who are under pressure, whose asylum system is under pressure, as is currently also the case with Italy, and which would then certainly facilitate also the work of EASO, or the future agency, on the ground, and would therefore also be to the benefit of the front, in particular the frontline member states such as Italy or Greece, who benefit a lot from EASO support. And in order to make that happen, the budget has now also been considerably increased. So for next year, it will be almost 150 million euro just for EASO to cover all the different needs and expenses.
Just a very finally quick answer concerning the cooperation with third countries and Africa, particularly how the Commission plan to involve African countries and so the countries of origin and transit in the management of migration on one side and to address the root causes of migration very quickly.
Yeah, no, and indeed, in the external dimension, which is also the area where member states seem to converge much more in their views and positions. It's more on the internal dimension that we have a lot of difficulties to overcome. For the external dimension, the Commission and the EU has always promoted a comprehensive and balanced approach as well. So where sometimes, okay, the indication is if the EU would only be obsessed with readmission, this is certainly not the case. This is also clearly indicated in the back. So we are promoting with all our partners throughout the world a very comprehensive partnerships on migration and mobility, which of course promote on one side the development cooperation to tackle the root causes of migration, so to reduce also the incentives for regular migration, to promote legal pathways, including legal migration, but also resettlement as possible means to reach Europe. We promote, of course, also the fight against organized crime, such as migrant smuggling and trafficking in human beings, so to fight against organized crime networks which are behind these phenomena. And of course, in our partnerships, we also try to promote strengthened readmission and return, which is, from the point of view of the European Union, of course, also an indispensable element of our relations. And of course, this is not, let's say, a part which is, or where some of our partner countries show indeed certain reluctance to cooperate. This is why also we are promoting these comprehensive packages, and the European Union is also trying, let's say, to use other policies to achieve, let's say, better results in this area, be it commercial policy, but for instance also visa policy, where the Commission has adopted last February a first report on the basis of the new provision in the visa code, where an analysis has to be made on the cooperation on readmission, and where then the EU may possibly decide already this year on reducing, for instance, visas for certain third countries who are reluctant to cooperate on readmission.
Okay, thank you very much for providing this very broad overview of what the EU is planning to do and the status of negotiations, if I understand well. For the moment is not advancing so much, so we will see in coming months where we'll be. So
thank you, Mr. Doelle. It was very interesting, and thank you, Alessia Di Pascale, for this dialogue. Now I'm talking to the audience. If you have questions to Patrick Doelle or Alessia Di Pascale, this is the right time to write it in the YouTube and Twitter chat box. And of course, you have touched upon so many big issues that it is not easy to sum up it, and probably not even posing a question, because we now we see quite clear how this migration governance really is a testing ground for Europe in its effort, for the European Union in its effort to to build itself a political authority, although the limits, of course, it has in dealing with the member states. We have a question from the audience. Does the EU has specific initiatives in mind to cooperate with African countries of origin on readmissions?
Yeah, no, thanks for this question. Yeah, which I think I tried also to partly answer. So, indeed, it is clear that well, African countries may be reluctant to readmit their nationals, even if the principle, let's say, of readmission has been enshrined also in the Cotonou Agreement, which was signed between the European Union and all African, Caribbean, and Pacific countries. But in order, let's say, to promote also these readmissions, so on one side, certainly it is important to promote legal migration and legal pathways also for these African citizens, as I said, to reduce incentives for irregular migration. So to offer more possibilities to come legally to Europe for those who want to work or who want to study in Europe. And the pact is also proposing in this regard the so-called talent partnerships, which we will now pilot with some of the Northern African countries, let's say, to promote also legal migration towards Europe. Then, of course, yeah, there are other tools such as the development cooperation, but also the visa policy I just mentioned. As it is normally an obligation to readmit your nationals, well, if this country remains reluctant to do so, then to a certain extent the EU may decide, if I may call it like that, to retaliate and to say, okay, then we will be much more restrictive when it comes to our visa policy with that country, and this may already be applied as of this year. Then, of course, was also very important when it comes to readmission to support then the reintegration of the persons who are returned to that country. Whereas one may always think about forced return, actually there are many migrants who, after a while of being in Europe for whatever reason, would like actually to return also to their home country. For that, there are a number of programs on assisted voluntary return, which are in place in the EU member states, which are also supported by the European Union through our funding in the member states, but then also the third countries, because then it's of course also important to ensure that these persons are well reintegrated into their communities. And this goes along with, let's say, support which is provided to the whole community and not just to the migrant in question. And where it's also necessary, let's say, to promote a certain form of dialogue with the communities, to make also sure that these migrants are not necessarily stigmatized if they return to their original communities. A lot of experience has already gained in this area, but this is something on which we will further step up our efforts, and where the Commission, whether we will also propose by the end of this month a new strategy on assisted voluntary return.
Thank you very much, Patrick. Yes, now, well, we reached the end of this session, and I hope, unfortunately, we were not able to answer to all the questions, but we will do our best to provide some answers through the Twitter channels. And I thank you once more, the speakers, the attending audience, and wishing you a wonderful evening or day. I would like to invite you to stay tuned on ISMU Foundation studies and activities through the website and the social media. Thank you, Livia. Thank you, Alessia. And thank you, Patrick. It was a pleasure.
Thank you very much.